6 game weeks to go, 2 free transfers, and a lot to think about. Let's get set up with my team selection video for game week 33. Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and today we're going to take a look at my team selection ahead of game week 33. Just a quick change of order for today, because we've had the double game week 37 announcement over the past week. I just wanted to remind anyone that might have missed it. Now, I won't go through this in detail with every single fixture, but you can see all 6 teams who double on screen. Those 6 teams are Brighton, Chelsea, Man United, Man City, Tottenham and Newcastle. Not in alphabetical order there, but in general, 6 double game weeks, lots of players that we're going to want ahead of that game week. And of course, we've kind of been planning with this game week in mind anyway. So a lot of the moves that I've been making recently, and probably a lot of the moves that other people have been planning recently, will have been with these fixtures in mind. It didn't look likely that any of the double game week fixtures that needed rearranging would go into any other game week. So luckily, we've kind of been able to predict this one. If you're wildcarding in game week 35, you're probably looking at this set of fixtures as a group of teams that you're going to want to target for game week 37, possibly, if you're like me, with an eye on the bench boost. In the meantime, though, let's not get too fixated on this because I'm sure you've consumed a lot of content with this reminder in this week. So let's get cracking with my team selection video, starting off with how my team performed in game week 32. So annoyingly, game week 32 was a little bit of lost progress for me. I got a red arrow down to 154k from, I think it was 138. So it's not the biggest red arrow in the world, but it is a bit frustrating to lose a little bit of the gains that I made on my wildcard just a couple of weeks ago. 59 points, and I did miss out on a couple of the key players, but generally speaking, I haven't lost too much ground. So there's definitely no reason to panic here. I do now have 2 free transfers to use as well as we go into game week 33. So there's plenty of routes that I can take to help get me set up for hopeful green arrows to come for the next 6 game weeks. In the meantime, though, just to summarize, 6 out of my front 7 did return, but none of them went massive. I probably didn't get the captaincy call bang on either because I captained Palmer for just 5 points, doubled to 10. And any of the other captaincy options that I was seriously considering would have got me more points. So a little bit frustrating there. I think the decision making was fairly valid at the time, but obviously the outcome didn't go my way. Mo Salah getting a goal, Haaland the same, and Saka obviously getting the goal and the extra bonus as well. So if I picked any of those 3, that would have gone slightly better, but it probably still wouldn't have been enough for a green arrow. The key component for me, and the reason that I did get a red arrow rather than another green, was because I had a doggy rather than Pedro Porro. Now, that's very frustrating. You don't expect goals from defenders all the time, but Porro's data is better than a doggy's, and maybe that's something I should have factored in. A doggy's isn't exactly 0 either. It is a bit of a roll of the dice between them, but Porro's was marginally better with slightly better goal threat as well. So annoyingly, couldn't afford Porro because of the makeup of this wildcard, but maybe I could have saved a bit of money elsewhere and upgraded a doggy for Porro, and I would have been laughing this game week. However, don't want to dwell on it too much. I've got 2 free transfers to make up the lost ground, and of course the free hit in game week 34 as well, so nothing to get too down about just yet. So let's take a look at the transfers I'm having a look at and considering ahead of game week 33. And the first one, and probably the most obvious one, I guess, is looking at taking Darwin Núñez out of my forward line. Now, it's not a transfer that I take lightly, because even though I'm free hitting in game week 34, that double doesn't matter to me. I actually still like the fixtures on the horizon. I like Crystal Palace. I don't mind that as a home fixture at all. And then West Ham away, followed by Tottenham at home. I foresee goals for Liverpool in both of those games. I do think Darwin fits into their strongest 11. So I think he'll get good minutes across those matches. But I think one way or another, I need to start removing players that don't have a double game week in game week 37. And out of all of the players that I need to remove, and I don't have to wait to make other moves first, like with Lascelles, I think Darwin Núñez is the one that I'm most willing to get rid of early. Crystal Palace is a decent fixture, but I think I can match up to that with one of these other 2 transfers in. And then, of course, I remove the need for a hit by waiting until game week 35. If I get it done now, it's one less transfer I need to make after the free hit, And I think Darwin's one player that I'm willing to take a calculated gamble going against this week. Now, obviously, the two transfers I'm looking at, as you can see on screen, are Rasmus Højlund or João Pedro. João Pedro I want to talk about first very quickly because he has come into the thinking of me and a few other people in the community this week. For what it's worth, I do really like him. 5.2 million, he's on penalties when he's fit and firing, and his data at 0.74 XGI per 90 is actually really, really strong. It's not as good as Nunez is, obviously, but I think he's got plenty going for him at that budget cut price of 5.2. The risk with João Pedro is he sometimes plays out of position, he sometimes does get reduced minutes, and obviously he's come back from a bit of an injury doubt. Quite a long injury layoff as well, may I add. I think it was 7 or 8 game weeks. So maybe we need to take that into account as well when we foresee how many minutes he's going to get between now and the end of the season. Now, a player that probably doesn't need to worry about that quite as much, although he's had his own injury doubts fairly recently, is Rasmus Højlund. His data is actually under half as good as João Pedro's, and he is more money. He's 7 million. So I don't save as much money by going for him, but he does have the benefit of probably better fixtures. Bournemouth away from home, not as good as Burnley away from home for João Pedro this week, of course. But coming out of the free hit in 34, I've got Burnley at home, followed by Crystal Palace away, whereas João Pedro has Bournemouth away, Aston Villa at home, and I don't think his minutes are quite as secure. Now, if I do make the first move, I think the one that I want to make the most is Darwin to Rasmus Højlund. So in the back of my mind, I'm going to book that in for now and then explain what the other two moves or one of the next two moves I could make are. So a quick one on midfielders, and one move that I did actually originally have penciled in for this week was going to be Bukayo Saka out, which again, I don't take lightly because I do really like Saka on penalties, great data and decent fixtures. And of course, Arsenal are phenomenal. But I did have him penciled as a transfer out this week to move in Phil Foden at home to Luton. Now, Foden is a player I would love to have this week if I could guarantee that he starts. But because he came off with a knock against Real Madrid, and they're probably going to want to make sure he's fit and firing for the return leg against Madrid, I think it's a risk on whether or not he starts this week. Obviously, if we get a word early with a team leak or something, or Pep says he's absolutely fine, he's going to start over the weekend against Luton, I will probably just make this move, and very happily as well. Luton at home, don't need to worry about 34, and then Nottingham Forest, Wolves, and then a double game week. That's a great set of fixtures. Foden's been phenomenal in the form of his career at the moment. I really wouldn't have too many hesitations about making that move. But I think it's pretty clear that we won't get positive confirmation ahead of the deadline unless it is a last-minute leak. So I want to prepare for life without making this transfer. One other option I could consider is still making the transfer, but bringing in Anthony Gordon rather than Phil Foden. Gordon also has good fixtures. Tottenham at home this week. Again, Tottenham leak goals. And at home, Gordon is an absolute machine. So I wouldn't mind making that move rather. And then coming out of the free hit, I've got Sheffield United followed by Burnley. Two absolutely fantastic fixtures. Doesn't get much better than that. And then goes into a double game week as well. So he actually on paper makes a lot of sense too. However, I think for me, if I'm not bringing in Phil Foden, who is absolutely unbelievable, I can't really make peace with selling Bukayo Saka just yet. I think I probably, if it's not for Foden, probably be happy enough waiting until game week 35 and make this move a bit later down the line when we've got more information, and I can probably just bring in Phil Foden anyway. Gordon can probably wait for later, and game week 35 might be the ideal hopping on point for him rather than Tottenham at home in game week 33. Either way though, I think Foden, if he starts, and Gordon in isolation are both great transfers in this week. I'm just not quite ready to let go of Saka if we know that he's going to start against Aston Villa at home. And I think Arteta will try his very best to make sure that he does, because it's a tough game and Arsenal are, of course, in a massive title race at the moment. So I think he's more likely to risk playing Saka than Pep is to risk playing Foden, if that makes any sense. So moving on to the defensive transfer, and of course, I'm going to want to focus on removing Jamal Lascelles. Now, he's injured, so I'm not even bothering with his fixtures for the rest of the season. He's out, and he looks like he's going to be out for a very long time. So it's effectively a dead spot in my team right now. So I need to make this move at some point before game week 37 to give me 15 playing players on a bench boost. Now, there are plenty of defenders I could look at. A lot of them will have double game weeks in 37. But if I was to make the first transfer I talked about, that being Darwin Núñez to Rasmus Højlund, I'm only going to have 0.5 million in the bank to make the second move. As I explained at the start of the video, I don't want to burn a transfer. I want to make that second move this week. So if I am going to make that second move this week, it means that I've got 4.3 million to play with from selling Lascelles, who's now down at 3.8 million, and obviously getting that 0.5 million back from Núñez to Højlund. Actually, sorry, it is 4.4 million. I've actually got 0.1 million in the bank as well. So that's a little bit handy. All of that means that I've got a very limited player pool that I can be looking at to bring in a player ahead of game week 37. The player I've got my eye on currently is Branthwaite. Now, obvious caveat is that he doesn't have a double game week in 37, which is very frustrating. But he does have good fixtures. Chelsea away from home, I'm not too worried about. I'm definitely going to be benching him this week anyway, as you'll see from my team in just a moment's time. And then after the free hit in 34, Brentford at home, Luton away, and then, of course, in game week 37, it's not a double game week, but it is Sheffield United at home, which is about as good as you're going to get for a single game week fixture. Now, obviously, a lot of people will probably be shouting at me right now saying, just get a double game week defender. And I would love to, but there are very limited players that I'm actually happy to bring in. Lamptey might be an option, but that would give me double Brighton defence. And Lamptey is a massive injury risk at all times as well. So I'm not too keen on him. I'm also not too keen on another Newcastle defender. There's obviously very limited defenders that I can be looking at, but Dan Burn is probably the only one I could afford. And honestly, but Dan Burn just isn't really doing it for me at the moment. I don't think that he is a player that I'm comfortable with bringing in at the moment. He might get rotated at some points. Obviously, he's come under a lot of criticism at times. So if Newcastle were to get back to anywhere near their full strength 11 or their full strength back four, his place might be at risk at some point. Not really fancying Kraft, not really fancying Hall either. So Branthwaite, I think, is probably the best of a bad bunch. Obviously, feel free to leave comments below if you disagree with me. I've got 4.4 million to play with if I make the moves in question. So if you've got your own thoughts or ideas on which player I might be able to bring in, please do feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I will take that into account. So let's take some time to have a look at the captaincy matrix ahead of game week 33. And I think on paper, one name does stand out ahead of the rest. And that is, of course, Erling Haaland at home to Luton. I think if you sat me down at the start of the season at game week 1, I had the fixtures ahead of me, and you told me to pick my bus captain for game week 33 all the way 6-7 months in the future, seeing Haaland at home to Luton, you'd say it's a pretty obvious choice. However, I think it is a little bit more complicated now that we've gotten to this moment in time. Now, obviously, Man City are embroiled in a really tight Champions League quarter-final against Real Madrid at the moment, with the second leg to come after the Luton game. Because this is the case, maybe there are some question marks over Haaland's minutes in the Premier League fixture over the weekends. Now, I think for what it's worth, I personally think it's relatively unlikely that he gets rested and doesn't start the game. I think it's more likely that he gets 60 or 70 minutes and comes off when the game is won. Man City, at the end of the day, aren't just fighting for the Champions League, they're also fighting for the Premier League title. And I don't think Pep's going to want to take too many risks, like benching his star striker in a game where, okay, yes, they're expected to win pretty comfortably, but he's going to want to put it to bed early. And the best way of doing that is by having your best 11 on the pitch for the first 60, 70 minutes and then get them off when the game is won. So I think he'll get decent minutes. It's whether or not those decent minutes are good enough to match up against the other four good captaincy options. Now, I think Saka and Son are decent options, but I don't want to get bogged down talking about them too much in this video because whilst they're good options, realistically, they're differentials in my books, and good data, good returns, decent enough fixtures, but I don't think they stand out as much as the other two. And the other two, of course, are Salah at home to Crystal Palace and Palmer at home to Everton. Now, I think Salah out of those two is the standout there. Palace, he's got a good track record against anyway. Not that I think that should really factor into our decision making too much, but his data is fantastic. 26 returns this season as well. That matches Haaland and Palmer. And of course, he's been rested in the Europa clash against Atalanta in midweek as well. So I think there's plenty going for Salah at home to Palace. I just think overall, I'd probably prefer 70 or 80 minutes, maybe even 60 minutes of Haaland against Luton, with taking the chance that he might even get more than that, because we don't know, against Salah probably playing 90 minutes against a much stronger defence in Crystal Palace. Obviously, Palmer weighs into the conversation as well. At home to Everton, he has been in insanely good form this season, and I think it would be a bit negligent to not think about him in the captaincy conversation this week. But Everton are a decent defence. I think they're 6th best for defensive data this season. So I think despite the fact that they are down near the bottom of the table, it's a little bit of a false position. And defensively, they're a bit tighter at the back than maybe we've come to expect of them. With that factoring in, I think it really comes down to Haaland against Luton, maybe in 60 or 70 minutes, versus Salah, probably with 90 minutes or close to against Crystal Palace at home. I think for me at the moment, I'm happy enough putting the armband on Erling Haaland, taking a chance that he does get 60 plus minutes. I think that is the way I want to go for the time being. And if for whatever reason he does get totally rested, the vice captaincy armband will be on Mo Salah, and I'm pretty happy with him as a backup option. I don't mind any of these 5 as captaincy options, and I think if you're chasing rank and you're after a differential, one of these other 4 options would be absolutely fine. But for me, the standout is Haaland, and I don't want to go against what I believe to be the standout captaincy this week. So finally, on to my team selection for game week 33. And of course, I haven't made my transfers yet. I rarely do before the deadline. But the 2 transfers I am looking at right now, as it stands, without any news on Foden or Saka's fitness, would be to remove Darwin and Lascelles for Højlund and Branthwaite. That will give me 0.2 million in the bank, which is always going to come in handy. It means that I use the 2 free transfers ahead of my free hit, meaning that I'm not burning a transfer as well, so that's quite handy too. And of course, it means that I've got a full playing 15 all of a sudden, which again, 3 or 4 game weeks ahead of the double game week where I want to bench boost in is always going to be helpful too. Now, Branthwaite nestles nicely into my 15th slot, that 3rd bench spot. Not too bothered about playing him away from home against Chelsea. Happy enough putting him on the bench. And Højlund, obviously, straight swap for Darwin Núñez. I think that's actually a downgrade. But again, like I mentioned, over time, I think it probably does pay off to have that double game week player ready. And I need to make one of those moves before the free hit in 34. Don't want to get rid of Saka. Don't really want to get rid of Salah or Gabriel either. So it looks like Darwin Núñez is the one that I probably need to shift a little bit earlier. Bournemouth away from home for Højlund is absolutely fine though, by the way. And Garnacho also on the bench against Bournemouth away from home. There is maybe an argument that I start Garnacho ahead of Højlund, considering the form that Garnacho is in at the moment. So again, let me know in the comments below which one of those 2 you would start, because honestly, that one is probably going to go down to the wire for me. If I take a look through the side, some of the maybe debatable points are whether to start Onana away at Bournemouth or Petrovic at home to Everton. I'm personally leaning towards Petrovic for the home fixture at the moment. Everton also don't have a ton of goal threat, whereas obviously Solanke at Bournemouth, they always carry a little bit of threat there. So let me know what you think of that one, of course. The away fixture for Man United is the thing that probably swings me away from starting Onana, whereas Everton at home for Petrovic, again, I'm more comfortable starting him there. But it does mean I'm starting double Chelsea defence, so maybe that's something I also need to consider, and maybe not putting too many eggs in one basket. Moving forward, though, I've got Van Heck and Gabriel. Not really needing to debate Gabriel. He's been absolutely fantastic. The Arsenal defence just look like they're never going to concede at the moment, so I think that's absolutely fine starting him, even against a very potent Villa side. And Burnley away from home for Brighton for Van Heck, I'm pretty happy with as well. Now, Udogie is a player that currently I'm benching away at Newcastle, and the main reason for that is recently he hasn't really carried that much attacking threat, and I do fancy Newcastle to score goals in that game. So if I don't really back him to get anything from an attacking point of view, and I'm not backing the clean sheet, what am I really expecting from him? And at least with Van Heck, I think there's a reasonable chance of a clean sheet. So I'm probably going to favour Van Heck over Udogie. However, if I think there's a reasonable chance that Udogie does get an attacking return, then maybe there's an argument for bringing him back into the starting 11 ahead of maybe Gusto or maybe Van Heck. Now, in the midfield four, obviously I'm benching Garnacho at the moment, which we've already discussed, but really happy with that power four. Salah gets the vice captaincy. Palmer, Son and Saka, all fantastic options for this week. With the asterisks, obviously, as discussed, that Saka, if he's not fit, if we get a word that he's not starting, then I probably have to transfer him out rather than making the Darwin move, for example, or the Lascelles move, and probably shift him to either Foden if we know that he's starting, or maybe Anthony Gordon if we don't get any word on Foden either. Now, moving into the forward line, that's where my captaincy armband rests on Erling Haaland as expected. And Højlund, as we've already discussed, starts straight away. But again, like I mentioned, we could potentially look at starting Garnacho instead. Now, Isak is the final player at home to Tottenham. Like I mentioned with Udogie, I'm expecting goals in this game, and I'm expecting Isak to benefit from that. So fingers crossed. Again, he's on penalties, great underlying data. As long as he stays fit, I think he'll be a fantastic pick for now, all the way through to the end of the season too. So with that, that's my starting 11. There are questions to be answered. And of course, we're still waiting on final press conferences on Friday, waiting for word on Saka's fitness, on Foden's fitness. And of course, please feel free to leave any questions regarding your own team ahead of Game Week 33 in the comments below. And I'll try and get back to as many as possible, if not all of you, before we hit the deadline on Saturday morning. In the meantime, though, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed today's content. And I'll see you as we start preparing for Game Week 34 next week.